Hello, listeners to the Third Way podcast. Welcome to another Manologue. I wish that these Manologues were a little bit more hopeful or inspirational, but these are the times that we're in, and these are the things that are on my heart and mind, and so I feel compelled to share them. And it's not that I don't have hope for where we're at. I know there's a lot of despair, but I also know that you can't complain and create at the same time. And so I'm really just focusing on creating and encouraging other people who feel like I do to create, whatever that looks like for you. So in this case, I'm creating a monologue that is about a dark topic, and that's the cost of silence. And it's my belief that tyranny or authoritarianism is essentially just a collective damaged ego led by a person or persons that are broken inside, and in that brokenness, they seek power because it gives them control over the pain. Sadly, though, no one ever gets that power that's broken inside and uses it for good. It inevitably gets used on the tyrant's own people, not just external enemies. And because it's ego based, in my view, that it's very similar to being in a relationship with a narcissist. It's very similar to being in a cult. It's very similar to having an abusive boss or an abusive leader of some sort. It's all kind of the same, comes from the same place. It just matters of scale, both in the level of abuse and the level of power. As many of you know, I come from a background of a high control religion, and it has many of the same traits that you see in the current administration. And one of those is silence, or the reliance on silence. And it's often assumed that authoritarianism or tyranny or some form of that runs on silencing the oppressed, silencing the dissenters. And certainly that happens. But really, that may start authoritarianism at any level, either in a home all the way up to a country, but it's sustained by silence. And I'll use the church that I grew up in and spent years in, that there were rumors of horrible behavior, but nothing was ever really spoken out loud. It was always in whispers. And then a couple of years ago, a huge scandal was revealed that was certainly horrific in the sense of sexual abuse and sexual assault, and also financial treachery as well. And it wasn't just because the people in charge of that church silenced the dissenters. It was they relied on the silence of a particular group of people, and that group of people are the privileged. And you can look at this in any society or any group of people where authoritarianism or tyranny takes over, is the large body of the populace that supports an authoritarian, is they do it through the complicity of silence. And the silence begins, first of all, with things like, well, you can't say that, or don't question, don't say that, don't use those words, or they might hear you. You see this now, and particularly in the business world, where they still say, like, well, politics is, try to keep politics out of work, or they'll say it's too polarizing. And my response to that is the word polarizing in the business world is just another word for cowardice. But that's true within a family, even, or within a group, is by saying something it creates tension, and therefore that's bad, is an act of cowardice, because the tyrant, the authoritarian, relies on that to happen. And there's a kind of self-preservation here with the privileged. And when I mean privileged, I mean people that kind of benefit from the way things are. So when an authoritarian takes over or is in charge, they generally benefit in some way from that, or they've got a special kind of status. And it's quite rare to have someone with privilege to speak up, because for obvious reasons, there's a sense of the fear of being persecuted or taken out or loss of status. So I understand the fear. But those of us that come from a place of privilege, if we don't say something, we are then contributing to tyranny itself. And I think of a character in the Bible that's not often spoke of very often. His name was Joseph of Arimathea. I might be saying his last part incorrectly, but he was a wealthy man who had become a follower of Jesus. And when Jesus was murdered, he was the one that went and petitioned for the body and paid for the tomb and the burial, process. And, sometimes it's overlooked because it's, he's just going and asking for a body. But it was a great act of defiance because of his position in that society at the time. And there's so few people like that. There's enough to be inspired. Like you see this like Schindler's List type situations. And there's examples in the civil rights era. There's examples going back to the Civil War. But by and large, silence is kind of the norm. I can't tell you the level of grief that causes me to know that people in a place of privilege, that their first and last response is to be quiet. Because narcissists, authoritarians, whatever you want to call that general label, these are people that are very afraid. And one of the things they're most afraid of is confrontation, which is why they acquire power. Because the more power they have, the more safe they feel. And if you confront them, especially if you come from a place of privilege, let's say you're a business owner or business leader and you confront Musk and Trump and all the horse shit that they're up to, they will, and if there's enough of us that do that, they will very likely change under pressure, because a bully needs power to stay in power. And when people that are powerful speak up, they, just in the very nature of it, don't have the courage themselves to continue with what they're doing. That's what makes silence so fucking expensive to society. Because if enough people say something, then then things can be changed. Now, as happens in any sort of situation where there's a narcissist in charge, a family, a group, a church, a country, it never ends well. It always ends in ruin and violence. The ancient poem about Ozymandias is kind of about this. That at the end of the day, the tyrant falls, but the cost of that falling is horrific. And if early on in a situation where we know in our souls that this is wrong, if those of us that have privilege say something, we change history. It's such a different place to be part of the cleanup of the disaster. And thank God for people that do that. But early on, just saying something as a business leader, as a leader of an institution. And this is where moral clarity comes in, because moral clarity and courage are sisters. And if you have a stirring inside of you that this is wrong and you don't say something, the cost of that is enormous. So I guess it's a plea to those of us that hear this, or those of you that hear this, and you are in a position of privilege or power, or you have resources, especially if you're a business owner, to say something. And that's why I launched the New Resistance Roundtables, which is an effort to unify those of us in the business world that are opposed to authoritarianism and opposed to the Musk-Trump administration. I'll put that in the show notes. And saying something could be very bold and outspoken. You could be like, Mark Cuban as an example, who makes it pretty obvious where he stands. Or you could be more subtle. You could be more subtle, like Costco and the leadership team at Costco, or the leadership team they stuck to their guns with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So it doesn't have to be loud and brash and stand in front of the tank type stuff. Sometimes just saying no out loud is enough, because you have power. So when powerful people say no, it's heard. Another thing you could do is, if you do have money, stop giving it to Democrats unless you give it to specific candidates. They are part of the problem. They help create this, and it's its own rant for another time. But give your money to, if you're going to donate to nonprofits that are, in the battlefield of human rights and on the front lines and around the various people that are the most affected by what's happening. So there's a lot of different ways to not be silent that doesn't necessarily include, recording a podcast about it or starting a group of resistors. I would just say listen to your own soul and you'll know what to do. Then the courage is often not waiting for courage. Courage often trails behavior. So if you have the clarity and you know what to do, then do it and courage will follow. And if enough of us do this consistently, authoritarianism, narcissism, broken people, especially broken men, will stop harming society. And that's quite the legacy right there. That's it for today. Thank you for listening.